A gunman's finger tightened on the trigger as a little girl froze in the middle of a small neighborhood store. In that split second, a single father named Daniel Rivera hurled himself into the line of fire, taking a bullet to save her life. 3 minutes later, the girl's mother, Isabella Grant, a high-powered CEO, too busy to notice her daughter's tears, burst through the doors and saw a stranger bleeding out on the floor because he had chosen to protect what she nearly lost. What follows is not only a story of survival, but of unexpected family second chances and the quiet courage that changes lives forever. Follow my story to the end and comment below the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights inside Miller's Market buzzed faintly as Daniel Rivera wiped the sweat from his brow. It was Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary shift he had learned to endure since his wife's passing. His 8-year-old son Lucas sat perched on a stool at the counter, pencil in hand, bent over math homework that always seemed harder than the last time. "Dad," Lucas said without looking up, "if I finish these fractions, can we get ice cream on the way home?" Daniel leaned against the shelf he had just stocked the corners of his mouth, curling into a tired but genuine smile. Money was tight, painfully tight, but Lucas rarely asked for more than a small treat. "You've been working hard, champ. I think we can make that happen." The sound of the store's front bell interrupted them. The glass door swung open and in walked a woman in a tailored navy suit, her phone glued to her ear, her voice sharp and fast as she tossed around words like market share and quarterly returns. A little girl trailed behind her, 6 years old, at most her blonde hair loose around her small face, her blue eyes already heavy with boredom. "Mommy, can we go home?" the girl whispered, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Not now, Sophie," the woman answered without a glance. "Mommy's working." She paced near the entrance, barking figures into the phone, while her daughter stood adrift in the aisles, a child unnoticed. Daniel watched Sophie wander toward a display of toys, cheap plastic figurines and plush animals stacked on wire racks. She picked up a tiny horse, turned it over in her hands, then sighed and gently put it back, too timid to ask for it. "That's a nice one," Daniel said softly as he walked past, lowering his voice so he wouldn't startle her. "My boy likes those too." Sophie looked up, surprised someone had noticed. "It's pretty," she murmured, "but Mommy doesn't like when I ask for things." Daniel felt the pang in his chest, a familiar ache. He glanced toward Lucas, who had set his pencil down and was watching the exchange curiously, his brown eyes so much like his father's. The bell above the door chimed again, but this time the air shifted. 2 men entered quickly, their movements too sharp, their baseball caps pulled low. Daniel's stomach knotted. He knew trouble when he saw it. "Everybody stay calm," the taller one barked as he pulled a gun from beneath his jacket. The metallic click echoed through the store. "Nobody gets hurt if you do what we say." The shorter man locked the door behind them and flipped the sign to closed. Daniel's pulse thundered. Lucas was behind the counter. Sophie stood in the open aisle. Her mother, still clutching her phone, froze at last, her face drained of color. "Hands up, phones down," the tall gunman ordered. "We're here for the register and valuables. Quick and easy." Old Mr. Miller, the shop owner, fumbled with trembling hands to open the till. "Please just take it. Just take the money." The robbers swept through, snatching watches, wallets, even the sleek device out of the woman's manicured hand. "Nice jewelry, lady," the shorter one sneered. "That'll keep us comfortable." Daniel kept his eyes locked on Lucas, whose lips trembled as he crouched low. Everything might have ended there, just another robbery passing through. But then Sophie whimpered, "I want my mommy." Her voice was small, breaking with tears. The gunman spun toward her, irritation flashing. "Shut her up." The CEO, Isabella, though no one here knew her name, reached out instinctively. "Please, she's just scared. Sophie, come to mommy." But Sophie couldn't move. Her tiny feet were planted, her sobs growing louder. "I said shut her up," the man roared, lifting his weapon. In that breathless moment, Daniel didn't weigh the odds. He didn't think about his rent due next week, the meals he skipped so Lucas wouldn't, or the years of grief since losing his wife. He thought only of his boy watching from behind the counter, and this little girl whose wide eyes stared down the black barrel of a gun. He lunged. The shot cracked through the store like thunder. Daniel felt it tear into his chest, hot fire exploding across his ribs. His body slammed against the floor tiles. Pain roared through him. But above it all was one certainty: the bullet hadn't hit Sophie. Dad Lucas screamed, scrambling from behind the counter. "What did you do?" the tall gunman shouted, startled. This wasn't how robberies were supposed to go. Panic rippled between the thieves. Sophie was crying harder now, clutching at her mother, who had finally rushed forward to grab her. But Isabella's eyes were on the stranger bleeding on the floor, the man who had saved her daughter, without a second thought. "We need to go," the shorter one barked. The robber snatched the cash, bolted through the unlocked door, and vanished into the night. Isabella dropped to her knees beside Daniel, pressing her hands against the crimson spreading across his shirt. Her expensive suit was ruined in seconds. She didn't care. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Stay with me, please." Lucas clutched his father's hand, tears streaming. "Don't leave me, Dad. Please don't leave me." Daniel's vision blurred. He forced his eyes to stay open to hold his son's face in focus. "I'm not going anywhere, buddy," he rasped, though blood flecked his lips. "Ambulance is on the way," Mr. Miller called, trembling as he held his phone. Isabella stared down at Daniel, her heart pounding with a fear she hadn't known in years. Why, she whispered, "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." Daniel tried to smile, though agony twisted through him. "She's just a kid," he gasped. Somebody had to be her hero today. Sophie, still clutching her mother, reached out a tiny hand to touch his bloodied fingers. "Thank you, mister," she said through tears. "Daniel," he whispered faintly. "My name's Daniel. That's my son, Lucas." For the first time in years, Isabella Grant, a woman who commanded boardrooms and silenced competitors, felt tears burning her eyes. She looked at the man on the floor and knew her life had just been altered forever. Outside, faint sirens wailed closer. But inside the store, under buzzing fluorescent lights, 3 lives had already collided in a way none of them could ever walk away from unchanged. The ambulance's red lights flashed through the window before the sound of screeching tires filled the street outside. Paramedics burst through the door with a gurney, their boots clattering against the tile. "Step back, ma'am." "We need space," one said firmly, guiding Isabella away as another crouched beside Daniel, already cutting open his shirt to assess the wound. Lucas clung to his father's hand. "I'm right here, Dad," he whispered fiercely, as though his small voice could anchor Daniel against the tide pulling him away. Daniel's lips trembled into a faint smile. "Strong." "Just like your mom," he murmured. Then he winced, his body shuddering as the paramedics inserted IV lines and wrapped heavy bandages around his chest. "Gunshot wound to the thorax, possible internal bleeding," one medic called out. "We need to move him now." Isabella's knees threatened to give way as she watched. She was used to seeing numbers fall on a screen, investments collapse or soar. But this raw human chaos, she hadn't been part of it in years, and it was happening because of her. Because she hadn't even noticed her daughter drifting in harm's way. "Please," she begged one of the medics, "save him. He saved my little girl." The medic barely glanced up. "We'll do our best. He's got a strong will that helps." They lifted Daniel onto the gurney. Lucas tried to follow, but his small body was swept aside by rushing uniforms. His face crumpled with fear. Isabella instinctively bent down, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Stay close," she told him. "We'll go with him." For the first time in his life, Lucas looked at a stranger, a woman he didn't know, and simply nodded. The paramedics wheeled Daniel out, the automatic doors flying open to the night. Sirens blared again as they loaded him into the ambulance. Lucas climbed in without hesitation, his small hand still gripping his father's. Isabella hesitated for a moment, torn between pride, fear, and responsibility. But Sophie's arms tightened around her waist, and Isabella knew she couldn't let this boy go through it alone. She climbed in too. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared into the night. Inside, every second was measured in heartbeats and machine beeps. One medic pressed gauze against the bleeding wound. Another barked numbers into the radio. Daniel's skin was growing pale, his breath shallow. Lucas leaned close, whispering over the chaos. "It's okay, Dad. I'm here. I won't let go." Isabella held Sophie tightly, her daughter's sobs muffled against her blouse. Her own hands trembled. She wanted to say something, to apologize, to promise this stranger that his sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. But words stuck in her throat. She had spent years commanding men twice her size in corporate boardrooms, but she couldn't find a single word to steady one dying man. At the hospital, the emergency bay doors flew open. Daniel was rushed inside under bright white lights, his gurney swallowed by swinging doors labeled trauma. Lucas tried to follow again, but this time a nurse gently held him back. "You can't go in there, honey," she said softly. "They need to work." Lucas's chest heaved with panic. "But he needs me." "I know," Isabella interrupted gently. She crouched to his level, steadying him with her gaze. "They'll take care of him. Right now he needs you to be brave out here." Lucas's lower lip quivered, but he swallowed hard. "Brave," he repeated as if reminding himself. Isabella glanced down at Sophie, who had gone quiet, now her eyes swollen with tears. She brushed a curl from her daughter's face and then looked back at Lucas. The two children strangers just hours ago stared at each other as if they shared something unspeakable. Hours dragged in the waiting room. The sterile air buzzed with fluorescent lights, every squeak of shoes on linoleum making Isabella's chest tighten. Sophie curled against her mother's lap, asleep at last, while Lucas sat stiff-backed in the chair beside her, clutching a small action figure he'd pulled from his backpack. His eyes never left the double doors down the hall. Isabella shifted, glancing sideways at him. She had built an empire from nothing, invested in global markets, survived hostile takeovers, yet here she was, helpless in a plastic hospital chair, next to an 8-year-old boy with more courage than most men she knew. Finally, the double doors opened and a doctor stepped out. His scrubs were flecked with shadowed stains, his expression grim but not hopeless. "Are you family?" he asked. Lucas leapt up. "I'm his son." The doctor's eyes softened as he looked down. "Then you'll want to know he made it through surgery. The bullet missed his heart by inches, but it caused internal bleeding. We repaired it. He's stable now, but it will be a long recovery." Lucas let out a shaky breath of relief, covering his face with both hands, as though the weight of the world had just slid off his shoulders. "Can we see him?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking despite her effort to keep it even. The doctor nodded. "He's resting. Room 314. Keep it quiet. He'll need sleep." They followed a nurse down the corridor, the floor tiles gleaming under harsh lights. Room 314 smelled faintly of antiseptic. Machines beeped softly around the bed where Daniel lay, tubes running from his arms, his chest bound in white bandages. He looked impossibly small against the expanse of the hospital bed. Lucas climbed into the chair beside him, clutching his father's hand. "I'm here, Dad," he whispered fiercely, tears streaming again. On the opposite side of the bed, Sophie tiptoed forward. In her small hands, she held the toy horse she'd seen in the store, earlier somehow retrieved from the chaos. She placed it carefully on the bedside table. Isabella's throat tightened. "Sweetheart, why did you bring that?" "So he knows I won't forget," Sophie whispered. Isabella pulled her daughter close, her chest heavy with emotion. She had been too busy for bedtime stories, too distracted for playground afternoons. Yet this stranger had shown more attention to Sophie in a fleeting moment than Isabella had in months. And now he lay here because of it. For the first time in years, Isabella Grant, who had built her fortune on being untouchable, felt something crack open inside her, and she realized she couldn't walk away from this man. Not now. Not ever. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in room 314 that night. Its rhythm filled the silence, a fragile reassurance that Daniel Rivera was still fighting. Lucas sat slumped forward in the chair, his small hand still wrapped tightly around his father's. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion finally winning, but even in sleep his grip didn't loosen. On the other side of the bed, Isabella Grant watched quietly. Her daughter Sophie curled against her shoulder. She had canceled every late meeting, every overseas call, and for once she didn't care about the fallout. Her board could wait. Her investors could wait. Right now, nothing mattered but this room, these children, and the man who had bled to protect her daughter. Hours later, the door creaked open and a nurse slipped in to check vitals. Isabella shifted in the stiff visitor's chair, her back aching from sitting upright for so long. The nurse adjusted Daniel's IV and smiled at Lucas, who stirred awake instantly at the sound. "Your dad's doing okay," the nurse said gently. "Rest is the best thing for him now." Lucas nodded, rubbing at his tired eyes. He promised me he wouldn't leave." The nurse patted his shoulder. "He sounds like a man who keeps his promises." When the nurse left, Isabella leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Lucas, are you hungry? It's been a long night." The boy hesitated. Pride flickered across his features, the same stubborn pride Isabella had seen in countless men who didn't want to look weak. But then his stomach growled softly, betraying him. "I've got it," Isabella said, standing. "There's a cafe downstairs. I'll bring something back." Lucas glanced at his father, torn. Isabella caught the hesitation. "I'll only be gone 10 minutes. Sophie will stay here. She'll keep watch with you." Sophie, still half asleep, nodded solemnly, as if this were a mission of great importance. Lucas gave a reluctant nod, and Isabella stepped quietly into the hallway. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at that hour, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee. Isabella ordered sandwiches and fruit cups, realizing she had no idea what Daniel or Lucas even liked to eat. At home, her chef prepared elaborate meals, nothing like the simple turkey sandwiches stacked in paper bags here. She felt oddly small in the fluorescent-lit line, humbled in a way boardrooms had never made her feel. When she returned, Lucas tore into the food as though he hadn't eaten in days. Sophie nibbled quietly beside him. Isabella watched something heavy pressing on her chest. These children were finding comfort in each other's presence in this unlikely family that had formed overnight. Later that morning, a doctor entered the room with a clipboard. "Mr. Rivera is stable," he announced. "He'll need close monitoring for the next few days. The recovery will be long, at least 2 months without work." The words hit Lucas like a blow. Isabella saw it in the way his shoulders slumped, the quick panic flashing across his eyes. She recognized that look, the silent calculation of bills, unpaid food, uneaten. She had seen it in struggling employees she had once brushed aside. "What about money?" Lucas whispered to himself, not realizing Isabella heard. Her chest tightened. This boy was 8 years old and already carrying the weight of an adult. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. She wasn't sure yet what she could promise. But one thing was certain, she would not let them face this alone. That afternoon, when Daniel stirred for the first time, Isabella leaned closer, her voice steady but soft. "You're safe. You're in the hospital." His eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain, but sharp enough to search for one face. "Lucas, I'm here, Dad," the boy said quickly, scrambling forward to squeeze his hand. Relief softened Daniel's expression. He turned slightly, noticing Sophie perched at the edge of the bed, clutching her toy horse. She gave him a timid smile. "Looks like you've got a friend," Daniel whispered to his son. Then his eyes moved to Isabella. She expected blame, anger, even dismissal. Instead, his voice was barely audible. "Thank you for staying." The words left her stunned. She hadn't saved anyone. She had been too distracted to even notice the danger until it was too late. Yet here he was thanking her. "I should be the one thanking you," she said, her voice cracking. "You nearly died for my daughter." Daniel gave the faintest shrug, though it sent pain across his features. Any father would have done the same. But Isabella knew that wasn't true. Not every father, not every man, not every person. Something about his certainty, his complete lack of hesitation, shook her in a way no hostile negotiation ever had. As the day wore on, Isabella found herself helping in ways she never imagined, fetching water, smoothing blankets, distracting Lucas with small games so he wouldn't cry. When evening fell, she even read a picture book aloud, at Sophie's request, her voice unsteady at first, but softening as the children leaned closer. That night, when both kids finally drifted into sleep, Isabella sat back in the chair, staring at the quiet rise and fall of Daniel's chest. She thought of all the years she had spent chasing success, of the countless nights Sophie had begged for her attention, while she'd brushed her off with another phone call. And she realized with startling clarity that this man, this single father with nothing but his son and his courage, had given her a gift she didn't deserve. For the first time in years, Isabella Grant bowed her head and wept in silence. By morning, the hospital's windows wore a film of gray rain threading down the glass in long, patient lines. The city outside moved on delivery trucks grinding their gears, nurses swapping shifts, coffee cups changing hands. But inside room 314, everything narrowed to a bedside and a steady beep. Isabella woke to the stiffness in her neck and the warmth of Sophie's small body curled against her. On the other side of the bed, Lucas had slumped in the visitor's chair, his fingers still laced with his father's. Daniel slept chest rising in careful, painful increments. bandages peeking above the edge of the sheet. Her phone had vibrated through the night with messages board members, her assistant, a client in Singapore threatening to pull a deal if she missed the 9 a.m. call. She silenced them all. She'd built her life on answering everything, on never letting a call go to voicemail. This morning, she let the calls die in the dark. A nurse came in with a quiet smile, checked vitals, wrote numbers on a chart. "He's holding steady," she said. "Pain's going to spike as he wakes more, but he's a tough one." Isabella thanked her, then slipped into the hallway to stretch her legs and clear the fog. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. In a corner lounge, a vending machine hummed beside a microwave with a handwritten sign, "Please do not heat fish." She almost laughed the absurdity of ordinary life in a place like this. Her phone lit again. This time she answered. "Nate," she said when her assistant's voice came on, already tight with anxiety. "Isabella, thank God. You disappeared. The board's reschedule." Everything she said. "Tell them I'll brief them when I can. Today I'm unavailable." There was a beat of stunned silence. The old Isabella would have filled it with explanations, a flurry of directives and promises. The new one didn't. She ended the call and exhaled, feeling for the first time in months like she'd made a choice that wasn't about power. When she returned, Lucas was awake, hair sticking up, face creased with chair lines. "I didn't mean to sleep," he said, mortified, like he'd failed a guard post. "You stood watch," Isabella said gently. "Even heroes have to blink." He stared past her at Daniel, and something in his expression shifted from fear to focus. "He hates oatmeal," Lucas blurted like he'd just remembered a code. "But he likes eggs and hot sauce. He pretends he doesn't, but he puts it on everything." "I can work with that," Isabella said, a smile tugging despite the ache in her chest. "Let me hunt down some breakfast that isn't a vending machine tragedy." By the time she came back, balancing a tray, scrambled eggs, toast, a small bottle of hot sauce she'd bartered from a sympathetic cafeteria cook, Daniel's eyes were open, cloudy with pain, but very much alive. He turned his head toward Lucas first. Relief loosened something in Isabella's ribs. "Hey," Daniel rasped. "Dad," Lucas said, breathless. "You scared me." "Scared myself too," Daniel murmured, a flicker of humor crossing his face. Then he saw the tray. "If that hot sauce is for me, you're an angel." "Devil sometimes," Isabella said, before she could stop herself. "But today I'll accept the promotion." He studied her like she was a puzzle. "You stayed." "I did." She kept her voice even. "If you hadn't, my daughter wouldn't be here." Sophie, who had been hovering like a hummingbird, piped up. "I brought you the horse so you won't forget." She pointed to the plastic toy on the bedside table. "Her name is Star," Daniel repeated as if tucking it away. "Thanks, kiddo." The door opened and a man with salt and pepper hair stepped in, a badge clipped to his belt, not a stethoscope. "Detective Armand," he said, offering a nod that took in everyone in the room with careful calm. "I'm here to take statements about the robbery." "Mr. Rivera." "I won't take much of your time." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I can talk." Armand stood by the bed with a small notebook. "You intervened when the suspect pointed the firearm at the child." "He was going to shoot," Daniel said simply. There wasn't time. Armand's pen paused. A flicker of respect maybe crossed his face. "Description matches both suspects we've been tracking. We pulled some street cam footage. We think we know where one ran. The store's owner will get a call to retrieve security video." He glanced at Isabella. "Ma'am, are you the child's mother?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. Inside, guilt churned. "I was on my phone. I didn't see the signs." Armand's expression softened. "Most folks don't see trouble until it climbs on the counter. You were lucky, more than lucky." He looked at Daniel again. "Media may call this a Good Samaritan story. That's your choice. We can shield your name for a while, but it tends to get out." Daniel's eyes slid to Lucas. The boy bristled at the thought of strangers intruding. Isabella caught it too. She cleared her throat. "Detective, if statements are needed, route them through me." Armand raised an eyebrow. "And you are Isabella Grant." She watched the flicker of recognition. Her last name traveled with rumors and Forbes articles. "I'm involved," He nodded slowly. Understood. We'll be in touch. When the detective left, the room felt different. Outside forces had acknowledged what happened, stamped it in ink. Inside, nothing changed. A father lay in pain. A boy refused to let go of his hand. A woman tried to earn in small ways a debt she couldn't name. Around noon, Dr. Morales came in with a tablet, his calm demeanor anchoring the room. "How's the pain?" he asked. "Like a truck parked on my chest," Daniel said. "But I can breathe. Progress." Morales tapped notes. "We'll manage pain carefully. No lifting, no sudden movements. We'll start you on incentive spirometry. Deep breaths to prevent pneumonia. Walking a few steps with assistance tomorrow if your vitals stay stable. Home in a week maybe if we keep winning the small battles. No work for 8 weeks minimum." 8 weeks. The words thudded in the air. Lucas flinched. Isabella watched the calculation bloom behind his eyes again. Rent, groceries, school supplies. Daniel didn't look at his son. He stared at the ceiling like it might offer solutions carved into tile. Morales continued, oblivious to the math bleeding the room dry. "We'll have a social worker stop by about discharge planning, physical therapy referrals, home care instructions. Do you have family nearby?" "Just us," Daniel said. "Me and my boy." Morales nodded with the practiced compassion of a man who'd heard 1,000 variations of the same story. "We'll make sure you're set up as best we can." He glanced at Isabella and Sophie, curiosity crossing his features. "You have good friends," he said to Daniel. "That helps." After he left, quiet settled. Rain thickened against the windows. Lucas stood suddenly anxious and paced to the small bathroom and back, as if motion itself held the walls up. Isabella rose and crossed to him. "Lucas," she said softly, "do you trust me enough to let me help?" He didn't answer right away. He was 8, but in that moment he wore the brittle armor of someone twice his age. "We're okay," he said automatically. The script of pride. She nodded, honoring it. "Then let me do things that don't mean you're not okay. Breakfast, homework help, keeping Sophie quiet when your dad needs sleep. Little things." He studied her like he weighed contracts. Slowly he nodded. "He likes his eggs with the hot sauce on the side," he said, the concession of a general handing off a flank. "And he gets cold fast. The blanket doesn't stay." "I can fix blankets," she said. "I'm excellent at blankets." That afternoon, she sent her driver home with a furious list: sweatshirt, soft socks, a decent pillow, real coffee, a fleece throw that didn't scratch. When the bag arrived, Lucas unpacked it with ceremonial care, arranging things with a focus that steadied him. He draped the fleece just right. Daniel's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Sophie colored at the tray table, tongue between her teeth. When she finished, she held up a drawing, 4 stick figures holding hands, a sun grinning overhead. She'd written their names in wobbly letters. Sophie, Mommy. Lucas, Daniel. "Is that a picnic?" Daniel asked, lips twitching. "It's us," she said earnestly. "We're happy." Lucas stared at the page. His eyes shone, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at his dad, then at Isabella, and then to Sophie's delight he added a dog in the corner. Evening laid down a deeper gray. Hospital sounds grew softer, more intimate, a cart rolling past a lullaby of monitors. A volunteer stopped by with a basket of paperbacks and puzzle books. Lucas chose a word search like he'd just been handed a mission dossier. Isabella read aloud from a thin chapter book Sophie loved, and though the story was about a mouse who sailed across a puddle, the cadence of her voice soothed the room. Daniel watched them, the powerful woman whose name rattled markets, the serious boy with his black ink determination, the little girl with sunshine hair who clutched a plastic horse, and he felt something he had not felt since the night he lost Elena. He felt the shape of possibility as fragile and shocking as a sprout poking through winter dirt. Later, when the kids finally dozed, Lucas folded into his chair. Sophie curled atop a second blanket. Isabella stood to adjust Daniel's IV line, then stopped, remembering she wasn't medical staff. She settled for retucking the fleece. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. "Do what? Stay." He searched her face, wincing as he shifted. "You're who you are." I don't know your world, but I've seen the magazine at the checkout. People like you don't sit in plastic chairs and chase vending machine coffee. They don't read mouse stories in fluorescent light. People like me, she said slowly, forget to look up. She glanced at the sleeping children. Today I looked up. His gaze softened. Your little girl is brave. She shouldn't have had to be, Isabella whispered. If I'd been looking, I keep hearing the gun, seeing her, frozen. Her throat tightened. You moved. I moved, he echoed like he was learning it about himself in real time. Because your kid is just a kid. Because my kid was watching me. He breathed carefully. For a long time after Elena died, I thought I was done being who I used to be. The guy who runs toward trouble. The guy who believes, I don't know, that decency still matters. Maybe I was wrong. You weren't wrong, Isabella said, and her voice didn't tremble this time. You were grieving, and you're still that man. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It felt like a room just after a storm, when the power clicks back on and the refrigerator hum returns, and you realize you can hear your own heartbeat because you survived it. Why are you really here? Isabella Daniel asked finally. Not the first hour. Now. She looked at him at the lines pain had etched around his mouth, at the bruised bloom beneath his bandages, at the boy asleep with his fingers still hooked around his father's wrist. Because you didn't hesitate when my daughter needed you, she said. And because I have spent years hesitating about the only thing that matters, she swallowed. I'm staying until I learn how not to. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That hot sauce was a good start. Tomorrow I'll upgrade to pancakes if the cafeteria gods allow it. Ambitious, he murmured, eyelids growing heavy. Go easy on the syrup. I'll bring fruit, she promised. Then we're square, he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted, and for the first time sleep pulled him under without a wince. Isabella sat back down. Rain slowed to a mist. She reached for her phone, not to check markets, but to set a reminder for 6 a.m. Fruit. Hot sauce, word search. And surprisingly, she added, look up. Beyond the glass, dawn would come, and with it decisions, social workers' discharge plans, the kind of logistics that could break a proud man who'd done something selfless. But that belonged to morning. Tonight in room 314, a fragile, unnamed alliance held stitched together by a plastic horse called Star. A fleece blanket tucked just right, and the promise of pancakes no one had eaten together yet. Morning sunlight broke through the storm, spilling across the hospital floor in fractured stripes. It was the kind of light that carried no warmth, sterile pale, but inside room 314 it felt like a small mercy. Daniel Rivera stirred awake, his chest heavy beneath the bandages. But this time he didn't wince immediately. Progress, he thought dimly. Beside him, Lucas was already awake, hair sticking in every direction, a word search balanced on his knees. He had circled only 3 words, the rest untouched. His eyes kept drifting back to his father, as if making sure each rise and fall of breath continued. You're supposed to find words, not stare holes through me, Daniel rasped. Lucas's lips twitched into a smile. Found one. Brave. Daniel blinked, throat tightening. Before he could answer, the door creaked open. Isabella Grant stepped in with a cafeteria tray balanced in her hands. She had ditched the navy suit jacket for a plain cardigan, her hair pulled back. To anyone else she might have looked ordinary, but to Daniel there was something almost startling about seeing a woman of her stature carrying styrofoam cups and a paper bag. I come bearing pancakes, she announced softly, glancing at the monitors. And fruit because apparently that balances the syrup. Lucas perked up. You remembered I promised, didn't I? Isabella set the tray down, pulling out small cartons of orange juice and a container of strawberries. Sophie trailed in behind her, dragging a coloring book and waving cheerfully at Daniel. Morningstar's dad, she chirped, pointing at the toy horse perched on the bedside table. Daniel chuckled weakly. Morning, kiddo. Hope Star slept better than I did. She did, Sophie said solemnly, plopping onto the visitor's chair beside Lucas. She opened her coloring book and began shading in a lopsided rainbow. Isabella helped Lucas divide pancakes onto paper plates, then poured coffee into the styrofoam cups. She slid one toward Daniel. It's not gourmet, but it's hot. Daniel eyed it, lips curving. Never thought I'd see the day a Forbes cover girl poured me burnt cafeteria coffee. Don't remind me of that photo, Isabella muttered, embarrassed. The stylist insisted on red lipstick. I looked like a vampire. Lucas snickered, and for a moment the tension broke. The room filled with ordinary sounds, a fork clinking, Sophie humming as she colored Isabella, blowing on her coffee to cool it. It almost felt like family, but reality pressed back soon enough. A social worker knocked gently and stepped inside a folder tucked under her arm. "Mr. Rivera, Ms. Grant," she said, acknowledging both with a polite nod. "I'm here to discuss discharge planning." Daniel stiffened. "Already I can barely sit up." "It's standard," the social worker said kindly. "We prepare early. You'll need weeks of recovery. No lifting, no work. You mentioned last night you're the sole provider." Daniel's eyes flicked to Lucas, then away. "Yeah, just us." The social worker opened her folder. "We can explore temporary assistance, disability coverage, food programs, community outreach. But approval takes time, and honestly, it may not cover everything." Lucas's jaw clenched. Isabella saw it. Saw the boy already calculating which meals to skip, which bills could be delayed. She felt something twist deep inside her. She thought of the penthouse she rarely slept in, the guest house sitting empty, the boardroom battles she once believed defined survival. "Thank you," Daniel said quickly. His tone was firm pride, stiff in his spine despite the pain. "We'll manage." The social worker hesitated, then nodded. "I'll leave resources anyway." She placed the folder on the bedside table, gave Lucas a gentle smile, and slipped out. Silence settled. Lucas stared at the pancakes like they'd turned to stone. Daniel closed his eyes, his face drawn tight, the lines of a man already rehearsing sacrifices. Isabella broke the silence. "You don't have to do this alone." Daniel opened his eyes, meeting hers. "I've been doing it alone for years. And look where it landed you," she said, softer than she intended. She glanced at Sophie, who was humming, happily oblivious. "If not for you, she wouldn't be sitting there. I can't stand by while the man who saved her drowns under hospital bills." His gaze sharpened. "I don't take charity." "This isn't charity," Isabella replied, holding his eyes. "This is gratitude. This is friends helping each other." Lucas looked between them, torn hope flickering but smothered by his father's stubbornness. "Dad," he started. Daniel shook his head gently. "We'll be okay, buddy." But Isabella wasn't finished. "At least let me cover the next few weeks. Food, rent, whatever it takes until you're back on your feet." No strings. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to refuse. Pride screamed at him, but his son's hollow eyes and the social worker's words lingered. Still, all he said was, "I'll think about it." It was more than she expected. She nodded once, not pushing further. Later that afternoon, when Lucas slipped downstairs with Sophie to fetch crayons from the gift shop, Isabella sat quietly beside Daniel. The air between them felt heavier, filled with things unsaid. "You think I'm foolish," Daniel said, finally, his voice rough. "No," Isabella answered. "I think you're brave. But bravery won't keep your boy fed." His eyes closed. "He deserves better than me." The words struck her. "He deserves you, and you deserve help. Let me prove it." For the first time, Daniel didn't argue. He just looked at her, exhaustion softening his resistance, and whispered, "Why do you care?" Isabella hesitated, then said the truth. "Because last night when you bled on that floor, I realized I've spent years chasing everything that doesn't matter. You reminded me what does." Daniel's eyes searched hers. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile but undeniable. Then the children barreled back into the room, laughing about crayons, and the fragile moment dissolved. But it lingered tucked beneath the surface, waiting. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of antiseptic mornings and sleepless nights. The hospital became a world of its own, nurses, wheeling carts, monitors, humming muted announcements over intercoms. For Daniel Rivera, every hour was marked by the effort of breathing, by the dull ache of healing bones and tissue. For Lucas, every hour was measured in waiting, in watching, in making sure his father's hand never felt empty. And for Isabella Grant, time bent in ways she hadn't known possible. She had once lived by clocks and calendars, carved her life into 15-minute meetings. Now she found herself sitting quietly for whole afternoons, Sophie's head in her lap, while Lucas worked on homework across from her and Daniel dozed fitfully. She was changing, and she knew it. One evening, she arrived with dinner that hadn't come from the cafeteria. Instead of styrofoam containers, she carried paper bags filled with roasted chicken, fresh rolls, and vegetables sautéed in garlic. She set them down on the small table near the bed. "Smells like heaven," Daniel murmured, stirring awake. "It's from a restaurant down the block," Isabella explained. "Figured you'd appreciate something that doesn't taste like cardboard." Lucas's eyes lit up at the sight of real food. Sophie clapped her hands. The children dove in eagerly, and Isabella sat back watching them. Daniel raised an eyebrow at her. "You're spoiling us." "You saved my daughter," she said simply. "Consider this. Interest on the debt." He shook his head, half amused, half stubborn. "If I keep accepting this kind of help, I'll forget how to stand on my own." Maybe she countered softly, "You were never meant to stand alone." The words hung between them, heavier than she expected. Daniel looked away, focusing on his son tearing into bread. His silence wasn't rejection, it was fear. Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep in mismatched chairs, Isabella found herself walking the quiet corridor with Daniel's doctor. "He's strong," Dr. Morales said, "but recovery will be slow, 2 months minimum. No lifting, no heavy work. He'll need stability, patience, support." "Support?" Isabella repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. "You're his employer," the doctor asked. She hesitated. "No, I'm his friend." Dr. Morales gave her a curious glance, but didn't press. "Then he'll need you, friend or not. Men like him, they try to carry everything until they break again. Help him share the weight." That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She sat in the corner chair Sophie curled against her chest, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Daniel shifted restlessly in his sleep, his brow furrowed. Lucas stirred too, whispering in a dream, "Don't go, Dad." Isabella's throat tightened. These two had built a life from scraps bound by love and determination. They were strong, but one wrong gust could topple everything. She resolved in that moment that she wouldn't let them fall. The next morning, she acted on that resolution. After dropping Sophie at school, Isabella called her assistant. "Cancel the London trip. Clear my calendar for the next week." "And no, I don't care what the board thinks." "But Ms. Grant—" "Tell them I've made an investment," she interrupted. "The most important one of my life." Back at the hospital, she brought books for Lucas puzzles for Sophie and decent coffee for herself and Daniel. Lucas devoured the puzzles. Sophie chattered happily while coloring. For the first time, the sterile room felt less like a ward and more like a strange makeshift home. But cracks still showed. One afternoon, when Isabella returned from a phone call, she found Lucas hunched by the window, his face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked. He turned eyes glassy. "I heard the nurses talking. They said Dad won't be able to work." "That means no money." His small fists clenched. "I can't let us lose the apartment. I'll do something." "Lucas?" She cut in gently, kneeling before him. "You're a child. It's not your job to carry this." Tears spilled down his cheeks, hot with shame. "But who else will?" Her chest ached. Without thinking, she pulled him into a hug. He resisted at first, stiff and embarrassed, but then he broke shoulders, shaking against her. "Your dad carried the world for you," Isabella whispered. "Let someone carry it for both of you now." When Daniel woke later, she didn't mention Lucas's breakdown. But she did sit closer, her voice low. "When you're ready, I want to talk about a plan. A real one. Not pride, not charity. Just building something better." Daniel met her gaze, his eyes weary but steady. Why, he asked again the same question he had whispered before. This time she didn't hesitate. "Because you saved more than Sophie's life that night. You saved mine. I'd forgotten what mattered. You reminded me." Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. Daniel looked at her a long moment, then closed his eyes, not in dismissal, but in surrender to the truth she spoke. The children slept easy that night, Sophie clutching her toy horse Lucas with a puzzle book on his chest. Isabella sat awake by the window watching dawn stain the sky pink. And she knew her life was no longer divided between boardrooms and profits. A line had been crossed in that corner store the moment Daniel had stepped in front of a gun. Now they were all bound together by blood spilled by tears shed by the fragile hope of what might come next. The hospital released Daniel after 10 long days. His body was stitched and bandaged fragile in ways that frightened him, but the doctors were satisfied he could finish healing at home. The problem was home. Lucas rode silently in the back of Isabella's sleek black sedan, clutching his father's duffel bag. He stared out the tinted window, watching the city blur past. Isabella sat in the front passenger seat, Sophie tucked against her side. Daniel sat beside Lucas, one arm pressed gingerly to his chest, trying not to show how every bump in the road sent a ripple of pain through him. When they pulled up to Daniel's apartment building, Isabella's heart sank. It was an aging brick structure with peeling paint and a stairwell that smelled faintly of mildew. A group of teenagers loitered near the entrance, smoking and shouting. The neighborhood wasn't cruel, but it was too hard for a man trying to heal and a boy just beginning to grow. "This is us," Daniel said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying embarrassment. "It's not much, but it's home." Lucas jumped out quickly, rushing ahead to unlock the door. Isabella followed, carrying one of the bags. Inside the apartment was small but spotless. Second-hand furniture, carefully maintained. Pictures of Daniel's late wife Elena lined the walls. The refrigerator was covered with Lucas's drawing superheroes animals, a few clumsy hearts with Dad written inside them. Daniel lowered himself onto the couch, breathing heavily from the effort. "I'll be fine here," he said, as though trying to convince himself. Isabella looked around. The place was safe enough for a man at full strength, but not for someone recovering from a bullet wound. She could see it, the struggle of climbing stairs with weak lungs, the risk of infection in cramped corners, the sheer exhaustion of cooking and cleaning when every movement hurt. Lucas emerged from the kitchen with a glass of water, trying so hard to help. "Here, Dad. You need to drink." Daniel smiled at him, pride and sorrow mingling. "Thanks, champ." Isabella felt her throat tighten. She turned to Daniel. "You can't stay here." He stiffened. "This is my home." "It's a trap," she said quietly. "Every day you spend here will drain you. You won't heal. You'll get sicker, and Lucas will try to fill the gaps until he breaks too." Daniel's jaw set. "We've managed before. We'll manage again." Lucas looked between them, torn. His eyes silently begged for something more, though he wouldn't say it aloud. Isabella drew a steady breath. "My company owns a guest house. It's empty. Fully furnished. It's in a safe neighborhood, good schools, fresh air. You and Lucas can stay there while you recover. No rent. No bills. Just focus on healing." Daniel stared at her, stunned. Then he shook his head. "That's too much. I can't accept that." "It's not charity," Isabella pressed. "It's thanks. It's what friends do for each other. I don't want my boy thinking we take handouts." Lucas finally spoke, his voice small. "Dad, it wouldn't be a handout. It'd be a chance." Daniel looked at his son, seeing the hope flickering in his eyes, the same hope he himself had buried beneath pride. His chest rose and fell, labored, not just from injury, but from the weight of choice. "Why are you doing this?" he asked Isabella at last. She answered without hesitation. "Because 2 weeks ago I was a different person. I thought success meant money, status, control. But when you stepped in front of that gun, you showed me what success really means. It means protecting what matters. It means family." She glanced at Sophie, who was humming quietly as she rearranged Lucas's crayons on the table. "You saved my daughter. The least I can do is give you a safe place to heal." Daniel's defenses wavered. He looked at Lucas, then at Isabella, then at his hands. Slowly, painfully, he exhaled. "All right," he said finally, "but only until I'm strong enough to work again." Lucas's face lit up with relief. Sophie clapped her hands. Isabella felt something deep inside her loosen, as though she'd been holding her breath since the night of the robbery. The next day they drove to the guest house. It sat on the edge of a quiet suburb, surrounded by trees that whispered in the breeze. The lawn was freshly cut. The windows gleamed, and a wide backyard stretched out with room for children to run. Lucas stepped inside first. His eyes widened at the sight of a bright kitchen, a living room with plush couches, bedrooms bigger than their whole apartment. "Dad," he called, "you have to see this." Daniel followed slowly, leaning on Lucas for support. He paused in the doorway, taking in the space. "It's too much," he whispered. "It's home," Isabella corrected softly. She watched as Lucas ran from room to room, his laughter echoing. Sophie joined him, twirling in the hallway. For the first time since the shooting, Isabella saw both children smiling freely, unburdened. Daniel lowered himself into an armchair, exhausted but unable to hide the awe in his eyes. He glanced at Isabella. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already did," she said, "with your life." The house was quiet for a moment, except for the sound of children's laughter upstairs. Then Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of pride finally surrendering to gratitude. For the first time in years, he let someone else carry part of the load. The guest house quickly became more than a refuge. It became a beginning. Its white walls echoed with voices they hadn't heard in years. Children laughing, pots clattering in a kitchen that smelled of garlic and toast. Quiet conversations that stretched into late evenings. For Daniel Rivera, it was strange territory. He had spent so long surviving, working 2 jobs, scraping together rent, stretching leftovers, that waking to the smell of coffee already brewed felt unreal. The first morning, Lucas ran down the stairs in socks, wide-eyed at the sheer size of his new bedroom. "Dad, it's huge! There's even a desk!" Daniel smiled faintly from the couch where he sat propped against cushions, bandages pulling at his chest. "Don't get too used to it, champ. We're just visiting," Lucas frowned. "Feels like home." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't want his son clinging to something temporary. Yet deep down, he couldn't ignore the way relief seeped into his bones, just knowing Lucas could sleep without hearing sirens outside or worrying about thin walls. Isabella Grant arrived not long after, her arms full of grocery bags. Sophie trailed behind, balancing a carton of eggs like a treasure. "Morning," Isabella said. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, clothes Daniel never would have imagined on a woman whose name had once made headlines about hostile takeovers. "Thought we'd stock the fridge." "You didn't have to," Daniel said automatically, even as Lucas's eyes lit up at the sight of fresh fruit and cereal boxes. "Apparently I did," Isabella countered lightly. "You can't heal on black coffee and stubbornness alone." Lucas grinned and Sophie tugged at Isabella's sleeve. "Can we make pancakes?" It became their first ritual. The 4 of them crowded into the kitchen, clumsy and chaotic. Isabella cracked eggs badly, one shattered across the counter yolk, sliding onto the floor. Sophie squealed with laughter. Lucas darted for paper towels, and Daniel, aching but amused, barked gentle instructions from his chair. "Whisk, not stir. And don't burn the butter." When the pancakes finally landed on plates, uneven, too thick in places, but golden, Lucas whispered, "Best breakfast ever." That night, after the children had collapsed in a heap of coloring books and cartoons, Daniel sat on the porch with Isabella. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Crickets chirped. For a moment, it felt like a world apart from everything they had endured. "You've turned my life upside down," Daniel admitted quietly. Isabella turned, startled. "In a bad way." He shook his head. "In a way I didn't know I needed. But I can't let this go to my head. In 2 months, I'll be back at work. We'll be back in our apartment." "Do you want to go back there?" she asked softly. He hesitated. Pride wrestled with honesty. At last he said, "No, but I don't belong in your world either." Isabella's eyes softened. "Maybe the world isn't divided the way you think. Maybe there's space between space we could share." Daniel didn't reply. The idea scared him more than bullets did. The next day, Isabella left work early for the first time in years. She picked Sophie up from school and drove her straight to the guest house where Lucas was already outside tossing a ball against the side wall. "Catch!" he shouted, and Sophie chased after the rebound, her laughter ringing like bells. Isabella stood beside Daniel, who had made his slow way to a lawn chair. Watching their children play together, she whispered, "They act like they've known each other forever." "Kids don't build walls the way we do," Daniel said. "They see what's in front of them. That's enough." Over the following weeks, Isabella found herself returning night after night. She learned to cook simple meals, sometimes under Lucas's tutelage. She helped with his homework, though he often corrected her math. Daniel, limited but restless, sat with Sophie to read storybooks, his voice low and steady. Slowly, a rhythm grew. Dinners together, shared chores, evenings spent with puzzles or board games. One Saturday, Sophie drew another picture. This time it wasn't stick figures. It was a house, 2 children and 2 adults standing side by side. Above it, in crooked letters, she wrote, "Our family." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Lucas' cheeks flushing added a small sun in the corner. Later that evening, as the children fell asleep on the couch during a movie, Isabella and Daniel quietly draped blankets over them. Their hands brushed lingered. For a heartbeat, both froze. Daniel pulled back, first clearing his throat. "Thank you," he murmured, "for giving my boy something I couldn't." "You give him everything," Isabella said fiercely. "I just reminded him to smile." The unspoken truth sat heavy between them. This wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something neither dared name, not yet. And though Daniel still told himself the guest house was temporary in his heart, he feared what would happen if leaving meant breaking the fragile, unexpected family they had begun to build. The weeks stretched into something Daniel could only describe as strange peace. Mornings no longer began with the shriek of an alarm clock before a double shift. Instead, he woke slowly on the couch or in the soft bed upstairs, bandages snug against his ribs, to the sound of children giggling down the hall. On one such morning, Daniel shuffled into the kitchen, moving carefully, hand pressed to his chest. He found Lucas and Sophie perched at the counter, whispering conspiratorially, while Isabella Grant attempted French toast. Attempted being the key word. Smoke curled from the skillet. "Is it supposed to be that dark?" Sophie asked innocently. "It's caramelized," Isabella insisted, though her cheeks flushed. Daniel leaned on the doorframe, a smile tugging despite the pain. "Smells like you're waging war with breakfast." Lucas lit up at the sight of him. "Dad." "We're making food so you don't have to." Daniel limped forward, lowering himself onto a chair. He studied Isabella as she frowned at the skillet. Here was the woman who once commanded mergers worth millions, who had reporters waiting outside her office. Yet she stood here, sleeves rolled up, trying to cook for a boy who wasn't hers, and failing spectacularly. And somehow, it was the most beautiful sight he'd seen in years. "You'll burn down the house," Daniel teased. "Don't tempt me," Isabella shot back, though her eyes softened when she glanced at him. "We're learning." After the chaos of breakfast, the children rushed outside to play, their voices drifting through the open window. Daniel sat with Isabella at the table, steam curling from their coffee cups. "You keep showing up," he said after a moment. She tilted her head. "Would you rather I didn't?" "No," he admitted. "But why? You've got a company to run. 1,000 things more important than us." She shook her head. "That's where you're wrong. For years I thought boardrooms and quarterly gains were everything. Then you stepped in front of that gun. You showed me that all the money in the world means nothing if I can't keep my daughter safe. You reminded me what I was missing." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't do it to change you. I just couldn't let that little girl suffer." "I know." Her voice softened. "And that's exactly why it changed me." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant laughter of the kids outside. Later that day, Lucas and Sophie dragged a blanket into the backyard and announced they were hosting a family picnic. They piled sandwiches, juice boxes, and cookies onto paper plates. Isabella sat cross-legged, Sophie leaning against her side, while Daniel carefully lowered himself onto the blanket with Lucas's help. "Dad, you okay?" Lucas asked, eyes full of worry. Daniel ruffled his son's hair. "I'm fine. Just slow." The children chattered and shared cookies, their joy spilling into the warm afternoon. Daniel found himself laughing, really laughing for the first time since Elena died. Isabella laughed too, her head tilted back, sunlight catching in her hair. For a fleeting moment, it felt like this wasn't borrowed time. It felt permanent. But when evening came and the children curled up on the couch to watch a movie, reality seeped back in. Daniel shifted carefully into the armchair, his hand absently tracing the scar beneath his shirt. "You can't carry us forever," he said quietly without looking at Isabella. She turned toward him. "Who says I'm carrying you?" "Maybe we're carrying each other." He met her eyes, something raw flickering there. "Lucas needs stability. I can't let him believe this is forever." "Why not?" she challenged softly. "Because what if it's not?" His voice cracked. "What if I let him hope for something I can't give?" Isabella's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But she also knew fear when she heard it. Fear of failing the person you loved most. She had lived that fear too, though in her case it was Sophie she had neglected with absence, not poverty. Instead of arguing, she reached across the armrest, her fingers brushing his. Maybe forever isn't built all at once. Maybe it's built in days. One breakfast, one picnic, one bedtime story. And then suddenly you look back and forever has already started. Daniel stared at her hand, then at her face. Slowly he let his fingers twine with hers. The children giggled on the couch, oblivious, wrapped in blankets and cartoons. Outside, the evening sky burned orange and gold, a promise painted across the horizon. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to imagine it, the possibility that forever wasn't a dream. It was right here in this house with these people already unfolding around him. By the time the maples out back had traded their bright green for a deeper summer shade, the guest house had a heartbeat of its own. Mornings began with the thud of little feet on the stairs, the hiss of a skillet. Daniel's careful breaths as he tested how far his ribs would let him reach before pain pulled him back. On the 10th morning of that strange peace, he stood at the open kitchen window with a mug of coffee and watched Lucas and Sophie race through wet grass, their sneakers sticking dark prints to the earth. Isabella slipped in beside him, shoulder to shoulder, smelling faintly of citrus and printer ink. She had tried to go into the office earlier, lasted exactly 40 minutes, and returned with her blazer draped over one arm and a paper bag of croissants in the other. "You look almost human," Daniel teased. "Don't tell the board," she said, smiling. "They prefer me immortal." He lifted the mug. The steam washed his face. "Immortals don't burn pancakes." Cruel, she said, but she bumped him with her hip and stayed there longer than she needed to, studying the yard like it was a market graph in an ascendant swing. A car rolled to a stop at the curb. It wasn't their usual sedan. This one was a rusted compact with a dented door and a bumper sticker half torn away. The driver didn't get out. The engine idled. Daniel felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with stitches. "Kids," he called, keeping his voice light. "Front porch, please." They came at once, dutiful Sophie clutching her plastic horse, Lucas scanning his father's face. The car pulled away a moment later, slow, as if reconsidering. The sun glanced off a long lens tucked low in the passenger's hands. Not a gun. A camera. Isabella saw it too. The smile vanished from her mouth. "Damn." Daniel set his mug down. "You expecting paparazzi?" "No," she said, jaw tightening. "But I'm learning I invite them even when I don't." "Because you're you," he said flatly. "Because someone leaked." She pulled her phone from her pocket and stabbed at a headline. "Local hero saves CEO's daughter, recovers in Grant Company property." A pixelated frame from the hospital lobby. Daniel on a gurney, Lucas's small hand on his shoulder, pulsed beneath the words. "I didn't approve this." "I wouldn't. I'll fix it." "You'll fix it." He kept his voice even for the kids. Inside, something flared hot and quick. "How?" "Tell them to pretend they didn't put my son's face on a website." She went a shade paler. "I'm sorry." Lucas had gone silent, chin tucked. Sophie leaned against Isabella's hip, sensing the temperature drop. Daniel saw the ripple of fear cross his boy's eyes and tamped the anger down with both hands. "Okay," he said softer. "Okay. We handle it. We keep the kids out of sight. We lay low until they get bored." Isabella nodded. Business mode ticking alive, not cold-focused. "I'll talk to legal. We can pressure the outlets to pull images with minors, threaten libel for any inaccuracies. I'll have security sweep the street, set perimeter cameras, rotate cars." "Security?" He repeated, a bitter laugh escaping. "For a corner store stock boy. For a father who stepped in front of a gun," she said, matching his tone but not his bite. "You are not a headline. You are a person. Let me treat you like one." Before he could answer, the doorbell rang with a short official buzz. Detective Armand stood on the stoop in a navy blazer gone shiny at the elbows. His eyes flicked from Isabella to Daniel to the children peering around their legs. "I'd rather not be here," he said without preamble. "But we need to talk." They settled in the living room. Armand sat forward, notebook balanced on a knee. "We picked up one of your robbers last night, the shorter one. The tall shooter's still at large. We've got a preliminary hearing tomorrow morning, and we'll need you for a lineup, Mr. Rivera." Tomorrow? Daniel asked. He could feel the tug of bandages just from sitting straighter. I can make it. Armand didn't hide his skepticism. Doctor, sign off on you leaving the couch. I'll be there, Daniel said, stubbornness surfacing like old bone. He aimed at a kid. I'm not letting him walk because I needed an extra nap. Isabella exhaled sharply. He's recovering from surgery. Can you do a remote identification? Photos? Anything that doesn't require him to climb into a courthouse with cameras outside. Armand shook his head. Defense will argue due process. We need it clean. Sophie's fingers worried the horse's mane until the plastic went white. Lucas looked at his father like he was trying to memorize his outline. We can arrange a side entrance, Armand added, reading the room. Unmarked car deputy escort. No press if we can help it. But I can't promise they won't find you. Daniel nodded once. Fine. When the detective left, Isabella rounded on Daniel, not angry so much as frightened. The fear made her voice low, more intimate. If you faint on those courthouse steps, I will personally carry you back. He managed a ghost of a smile. That would be a sight. Don't joke, he sobered. I'm going. She blew out a breath and paced to the window, watching the empty street as if it might confess its plans. I'll make calls. We'll do it quiet. My driver will take us. I'll have Nate coordinate with Armand, Nate Daniel said. The assistant who knows your whole life in color-coded blocks. Exhibit A, she said, and a half-laugh escaped despite herself. Then soft again. Let me be with you. This isn't just yours to carry. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say this was his fight, his duty, his mess. But Lucas's reflection in the window anchored him the small, serious face of the boy he'd promised the world. Okay, he said. You come. In the afternoon, Isabella attempted normal. She and the kids baked cookies flour on cheeks, the sweet fat smell of butter wrapping the house like a blanket. Daniel sat on the stool directing traffic with 2 fingers and a grin he didn't realize had become habitual. For 30 minutes, the world narrowed to a baking sheet and an oven light, and the urgent question of whether chocolate chips should be folded or poured. Then her phone buzzed hard enough to rattle the counter. Emergency board session, PR escalation, stock trending negative on rumor of misuse of corporate assets. She silenced it. It buzzed again, then again, insistent a mosquito you can't swat. Go, Daniel said quietly. It's your job. She looked at the kids. Lucas carefully scraped dough into messy moons. Sophie arranged chips into smiley faces that melted ear to ear. This is my job, Isabella said. You'll lose skin with those people, he warned. I have skin to spare. She touched his forearm, light, deliberate. You and Lucas don't. When dusk seeped through the windows, the street outside breathed a different kind of quiet. Isabella took a call on the porch. After the kids were down, her voice restrained steel. No, Mark. I didn't install a family and company housing for optics. I did it because a man bled for my daughter, and because I refused to live like my heart is a rounding error. She listened, jaw working, then put out the statement. We support the Rivera family privately and unequivocally. If shareholders want to know why they can call me, I'll answer every single one. She hung up and stared at the dark yard. Daniel eased the door open and stepped out, careful as a cat on ice. Overstepping, he asked. She huffed a laugh. Understepping for once. You're going to make enemies. I already have them, she said. I'd rather choose the ones I earn. They stood a long time hearing the hum of the fridge through the kitchen window, the sing-song night insects warming their instruments. A sedan rolled by too slow. A dog barked 2 yards over. The world stubbornly remained the world. You know, Daniel said softly, Elena used to talk about lines, about how we draw them in chalk when we're scared, and then the rain comes and the chalk runs, and if we're brave, we don't redraw them. He swallowed. I've been redrawing a lot of lines since she died. Isabella's eyes shone in the porch light. I'm tired of drawing them at all. He placed his palm on the rail and looked at her hand beside it, fingers pale against the wood. Tomorrow's going to be loud, he said. For me. For Lucas. For you, if you're near me. I'm not near you, she said. I'm with you. It landed in him like a steadying meal. He nodded, unable to say more without saying too much. When they went back in, they found Lucas sitting upright on the couch, wide awake, a book open but unread on his lap. "I heard you," he said, not sheepish, not proud. "Just honest." "Couldn't sleep?" Daniel asked, sitting down with a grunt. "I want to go tomorrow," Lucas said. "I want to see the bad guy know he didn't win." Daniel's heart pulled a painful protective tug. "Not this time." "I'm not scared," Lucas said. "I know," Daniel said. "That's why I'm scared for you." He smoothed his boy's hair. "Your job is to stay with Sophie. Make sure she teaches Star to be quiet. That's important work." Lucas considered it measuring duty against desire and finally nodded, eyes damp but steady. "Okay, but you come back." "I will," Daniel said, praying the promise would be true. He put the boy back to bed and stood a moment in the doorway, the soft shush of a white noise app filling the room, the small rise and fall of breath, a lighthouse in the dark. Isabella waited in the hall, back against the wall, arms folded not defensively, but like she was holding in 1,000 things at once. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he echoed. He slept badly, dreams like broken glass, the snap of a trigger. Elena's voice saying, "Lines, lines, let the rain come." In the gray hour just before dawn, he woke to the sound of a car idling somewhere out on the street. He shuffled to the window and peered through the slat of the blind. An unmarked sedan. Another. He counted 3 silhouettes, the ember of a cigarette flaring, then a quick stamp out as a figure noticed the curtain shift. Not press. Police. Armand keeping his word. Daniel eased the blind closed and stood there for a breath, hand flattened over the ache beneath his ribs. He felt both small and huge at once, a man about to walk into a room that could tilt his family's life either way, and a father who had already made the hardest choice he would ever make. Behind him, the quiet house breathed coffee. Gurgling to life on a timer, Isabella had set the thud of Sophie's foot kicking a wall in her sleep. Lucas murmuring something unintelligible and content. The day would come, roaring cameras or not, legal pads, or not lines drawn or washed away. He straightened, testing his lungs, measuring his pain, and told himself the truth out loud. "We're okay," he said. "We're okay." In the mirror by the stairs, he looked older than the man who'd stocked shelves, and stronger too. He took the rail and started down toward the coffee, toward Isabella's steady eyes, toward the unmarked cars, toward whatever waited that would test the fragile forever he'd finally allowed himself to picture. The courthouse rose like a wall of glass and stone against the morning sky. Its steps gleamed from a recent rinse of rain, the air carrying that damp metallic smell of a city still waking. Daniel Rivera shifted uncomfortably in the back seat of the unmarked sedan as it rolled to the side entrance. His ribs ached with each breath, but his jaw was set. Beside him, Isabella Grant watched the street with sharp eyes, her phone clutched in one hand, though she hadn't touched it in half an hour. She'd left Sophie with her driver under strict orders not to leave the guest house until they returned. Lucas had stayed too, though he'd begged to come. It had nearly broken Daniel's heart to refuse him. Detective Armand turned in his seat. "We'll bring you through a service hallway, then directly to the viewing room. No press in that corridor. Still, keep your head down. Cameras love a hero." Daniel gave a grim smile. "Not the kind of hero I want to be." Isabella reached for his hand. He hesitated, then let her hold it, the contact grounding him. Inside the courthouse was a maze of echoing halls and polished floors. The fluorescent lights hummed the smell of old paper and coffee clinging to the air. Daniel's boots squeaked faintly as he walked each step, sending a muted throb through his chest. Isabella walked at his side, a silent shield. They were led into a narrow room with a wide glass panel. Beyond it, the suspects sat in a line of 5 men, each with numbers pinned to their chests. Daniel's breath caught when he saw the second man from the left. Tall, angular, his baseball cap gone, but the cold glare unmistakable. "That's him," Daniel said immediately, voice rough. "Number 2. Armand's pen hovered. "You're certain?" "As certain as I am that he pulled the trigger." The suspect smirked suddenly, as if sensing the weight of Daniel's gaze through the glass. The expression was slow, deliberate, meant to taunt. Daniel's fists clenched. For a heartbeat, the courthouse air fell away, and he was back in the corner store, the barrel of a gun swinging toward Sophie's tiny frame. Isabella's hand pressed against his forearm. Breathe, she whispered. Daniel blinked, drew air carefully into aching lungs, and forced himself to nod. Yes, that's him, the detective scribbled. Identification confirmed. The suspect was led out with the others, but not before he threw Daniel one last sneer. It lingered a promise that unsettled more than it should have. On the way back through the service corridor, the hum of reporters was audible outside, the frantic shouts, the snapping of camera shutters. Armand guided them a different way out through a maintenance door, where another unmarked sedan waited. Inside the car, silence reigned for several minutes. Daniel's pulse was still hammering his chest tight. You did it, Isabella said at last. Her voice was gentle but firm, anchoring. Doesn't feel like it, he muttered. Feels like I painted a target bigger on my back. You didn't, she countered. You drew a line, and you stood on the right side of it. He looked at her weary but grateful. You always have a way of saying things like you're certain, even when I'm not. She smiled faintly. That's because I need you to believe what I already know. When they returned to the guest house, Lucas ran out onto the porch, his small frame braced with determination. Did you find him? Daniel crouched, slowly wincing. Yeah, champ, we found him. Did he see you? Daniel hesitated. Doesn't matter. What matters is he won't hurt anyone else. Lucas nodded, though his eyes searched his father's face for cracks. Then he wrapped his arms tight around Daniel's waist, careful of the bandages. You kept your promise. You came back. Sophie clutched Star the horse and whispered, Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and ruffled both their heads. It's all right now. We're together. That night, Isabella sat on the back porch with Daniel. The stars were faint above the suburban glow, but the air was clear. She handed him a cup of tea, then sat quietly until he finally spoke. When Elena died, I told myself I was done risking anything. I thought if I kept my world small, if I just worked and raised Lucas, maybe I could keep us safe. Then that night at the store, his voice faltered. He stared into the tea like it held answers. I didn't even think. I just moved. And now, I don't know what comes next. Isabella leaned closer. What comes next is healing. What comes next is family. If you'll let it. He turned his head, met her eyes. Something unspoken burned there, gratitude, fear, longing. You really think someone like me belongs in your world? She shook her head. No, I think I finally belong in yours. Daniel let out a slow breath, the tightness in his chest easing not from medicine but from her words. For the first time since the bullet tore into him, he felt the faintest glimpse of a future that wasn't just survival. And as the night deepened, with the children asleep inside and the stars scattered faintly above, he allowed himself to believe it might be true. 2 weeks after the courthouse lineup, the house had settled into a rhythm that felt alarmingly like permanence. Morning sunlight streamed through lace curtains, pooling across the hardwood floor, as Lucas and Sophie argued over who got to feed the neighbor's cat that had taken to wandering into the yard. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a crossword puzzle, glasses slipping down his nose, ribs still aching but healing. Isabella arrived late that morning, her phone tucked away her briefcase left in the car. She carried only a bag of groceries and the kind of smile Daniel had begun to rely on more than he dared admit. You're late, Daniel teased. Lucas almost had to burn the toast without you. Correction, Lucas piped up. I perfected the toast. He lifted a slightly charred slice, like a trophy. Sophie giggled, covering her mouth. It's black on the bottom. Daniel chuckled, the sound breaking into a cough he tried to disguise. Isabella's gaze darted to him instantly, concern flashing across her face. Don't look at me like that, he said, waving a hand. Doctor says coughing's normal. Normal doesn't mean painless, she countered, setting the groceries down. I brought ginger tea. Helps. Lucas smirked. She's bossier than the nurse. Get used to it, Daniel muttered, but his eyes softened as he watched Isabella move through the kitchen with ease that surprised them both. The children bolted outside after breakfast, leaving the adults in rare quiet. Isabella lingered at the table, her hand brushing Daniel's crossword absent-mindedly. You ever thought of going back to school? She asked suddenly. He blinked. School night classes, maybe? You've got a good mind. You could manage something beyond stocking shelves. Daniel gave a low laugh. You really think a guy who can barely keep up with his son's homework is going to sit in a classroom again? "I think," she said, carefully, "you underestimate yourself." The conversation stuck with him. Later, as he watched Lucas help Sophie ride the second-hand bike, Isabella had bought, Daniel felt a strange stirring. Not shame, but possibility. That evening, while the kids built a blanket fort in the living room, Isabella pulled out her laptop. "I had my assistant put together something," she said, sliding the screen toward Daniel. It displayed a list of training programs and community college classes. "Just options. You don't have to decide now." Daniel stared at it, then at her. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you saved Sophie's life," she said softly. "But more than that, you reminded me to live mine. Maybe it's time someone reminded you too." His throat tightened. He closed the laptop gently as though it were fragile. "You're asking me to imagine a world where I get to dream again." "Exactly," she whispered. The children's laughter filled the room, echoing under the fort. Daniel and Isabella sat in silence, the air between them heavy with words unsaid. Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Lucas clutching a flashlight, Sophie holding Star the horse tight, Daniel stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine. Isabella joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "They're happy," she said, watching through the window. "They are," Daniel agreed. "Feels like they've been waiting for each other their whole lives." "Maybe they have," she murmured. Daniel turned to her. The porch light traced the line of her jaw, the weariness in her eyes tempered by something softer. He wanted to tell her what he was feeling, but fear held him back. Fear that this was temporary. Fear that when the bandages came off, the life they'd built here would vanish. Instead, he said quietly, "You deserve better than me." Her head snapped toward him. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare measure yourself against the men in my world. They had money, but none of them had the courage to stand where you did. None of them would have taken that bullet." He swallowed hard, fighting the sting in his eyes. "I wasn't thinking. I just moved." And that, Isabella said, reaching for his hand, is why you're exactly what I never knew I needed. Daniel's fingers tightened around hers. For a moment the porch disappeared, the night faded, and all that existed was the warmth of her touch. From inside, Lucas's sleepy voice drifted out. "Dad, you coming to bed?" Daniel squeezed her hand once before stepping away. "Yeah, champ," he called back. But as he walked inside, his chest aching from more than just healing wounds, he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The days lengthened, summer thickening with heat. The guest house no longer felt borrowed. It pulsed with life, with children's voices spilling through the hallways, with the smell of garlic and onions sautéing in the evenings, with the low thrum of conversations that stretched past midnight. Daniel Rivera still healed slowly, but the color had returned to his cheeks. He could walk without leaning on the rail now, though stairs remained a challenge. Lucas hovered constantly, every move shadowed by the boy's determination to help. Daniel sometimes pretended annoyance, but inside he glowed with pride. One Saturday morning, Isabella surprised them all. She drove up in a battered pickup, dust rising behind the tires. The truck bed held something covered in a tarp. Lucas's eyes lit up immediately. "What is it, Patience?" Isabella said with a mysterious smile. She tugged the tarp away to reveal a wooden tire swing frame, the kind you anchored in the backyard. Sophie squealed, bouncing in place. "A swing. Mommy, really?" Daniel shook his head, astonished. "You didn't have to." "Stop saying that," Isabella interrupted gently. "I wanted to. They deserve this." Together with Lucas handing tools and Sophie supervising with Star the horse perched on the porch rail, they built it. Daniel insisted on doing some of the work despite his ribs, and Isabella didn't fight him. Instead, she steadied the frame while he tightened bolts with careful hands. Their shoulders brushed often, each touch lingering a little longer than necessary. When the swing finally stood, Lucas climbed on first, pumping his legs, laughter bursting from him in wild peals. Sophie followed, her blonde hair streaming behind her as she soared higher. Daniel and Isabella stood side by side, watching them. "They look like they've been brother and sister forever," Isabella whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "Maybe they are now." That night, the children fell asleep in the living room fort. They'd rebuilt, tired from swinging until the stars came out. Daniel draped blankets over them while Isabella lit candles in the kitchen. The two of them sat with mugs of tea, the glow painting their faces warm. "You know," Isabella said after a long silence, "I never wanted this house to be empty. I bought it because I thought maybe one day I'd remember what home feels like. I didn't expect it to happen like this." Daniel studied her. Home isn't walls or windows. It's what fills them. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you filled mine." The weight of her words settled deep in his chest. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. She didn't pull away. Before anything more could be said, Lucas's sleepy voice drifted from under the blanket fort. "Dad, did you ever love anyone after Mom?" The question cut like a blade. Daniel froze. Isabella looked away quickly, giving him privacy he hadn't asked for. Daniel cleared his throat. "No champ, not after her." He hesitated, then added softly, "But love, it doesn't always come once. Sometimes it sneaks back when you least expect it." There was quiet from the fort. Then Lucas murmured, "Good, 'cause I think maybe you should." Daniel swallowed hard, meeting Isabella's eyes across the table. Her gaze was tender, unguarded, shimmering in the candlelight. Later, when the children were tucked properly into their beds, Isabella lingered by the doorway. "Lucas is wise beyond his years," she whispered. "He's had to be," Daniel admitted. "Too much too soon." She touched his arm lightly. "Then let's give him a childhood back. Both of them." The house fell quiet after she left for the night, but Daniel lay awake long after replaying her words. For the first time since Elena's death, he let himself imagine a future not defined by loss, but by love rediscovered. And though the thought terrified him, it also felt like breathing clean air after years underground. By morning, the house smelled like cinnamon and dish soap, the quiet, clean kind of morning that feels earned. Daniel woke before the children, his ribs no longer screaming, just murmuring their constant reminder. He dressed slowly and padded down the hall, pausing at Lucas's doorway. The boy slept tangled in sheets, one arm flung over his face, flashlight still on the pillow beside him. Down the hall, Sophie lay diagonally across her small bed. Star, the plastic horse, tucked beneath her chin like a secret. In the kitchen, Isabella stood barefoot, hair in a loose knot, stirring oatmeal with an intensity she usually saved for investor calls. The radio murmured some early jazz, the world outside still pale and new. "Dangerous," Daniel said, leaning on the doorframe. "Last time you tried breakfast, we filed a smoke claim." She shot him a look over her shoulder that was half challenge, half grin. "It's oatmeal. Even I can't burn water twice." He took a seat and watched the simple ritual, her hand on the wooden spoon, the steam fogging her glasses, the tiny white bowl she set carefully in front of him. It wasn't the food, it was the gentleness. It unnerved him how much that mattered. "Board emergency this afternoon," she said lightly, like telling him the weather. "They've decided I'm either soft or brilliant. The vote swings hour by hour." "Because of me," he said. "Because of me," she corrected. "Because I made a decision with my heart in public, and men who only know numbers don't have the vocabulary for that." He rolled a shoulder, testing where pain lived today. "If it helps your vote, we can move back to the apartment. I don't want to be the weight that tips your scales." She set the spoon down with a click. "Don't do that, Daniel. Don't decide you're the problem because they lack imagination. You've worked your whole life to build what you have," he said. "Lucas and I were a thunderstorm. You don't owe us the roof." Isabella sighed through her nose, the kind of exhale that ends arguments without slamming any doors. "Eat, please." He did. The oatmeal was better than he expected. Warm, a little sweet, his name somehow hidden in it. When the children thundered down the stairs, the house woke fully. Sophie chattered about art time at school. Lucas read a paragraph from a library book with dramatic flair that would have impressed any stage. They were halfway through breakfast when Isabella glanced at the clock. "I can drive Sophie," Daniel offered, then caught himself. "If the doctor ever clears me to lift more than a fork." "I've got it," Isabella said. To Sophie, new rule. Hugs before the car. Sophie obediently hugged Daniel first, fierce, quick. He closed his eyes for the span of it, surprised at how much the small pressure steadied him. Then she hugged Lucas, then her mother, Then she was gone in a flurry of backpack zippers and small shoes. After the front door closed, Lucas hovered near the sink, rearranging cups that didn't need rearranging. "We're not moving back, are we?" he asked without looking up. Daniel took in the boy's hunched shoulders, the way he braced for a blow. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I like it here," Lucas said. "Sophie likes it too. And Ms. Isabella? She laughs more. It sounds real." Daniel scrubbed a hand over his jaw. "If we leave, it won't be because we like it less. It'll be because it's right." Lucas nodded, but his mouth pinched. Right didn't always mean fair. Isabella returned with the soft slam of the front door. "Drop-off success," she reported. "Sophie thinks her macaroni necklace will sell out at the class art show." "Clearly, your child," Daniel said, and she laughed, tipping her head back so light caught on her throat. Before noon, Detective Armand called. "Quick update," he said. "Shooter's arraignment moved up. Lawyers going to push for bail citing community ties. We'll counter with the violence of the offense and flight risk, but I don't want you blindsided if a number gets stamped today." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What if he walks?" "Then my team circles tighter," Armand said. "And you do what you've been doing, stay smart." After the call, Daniel stared at his hands. He could feel the old impulse act fix run at the problem until it disintegrated. His body wouldn't let him. Pride bristled. Fear steadied it. Isabella placed a glass of water in front of him. "We will manage whatever comes." "How do you sound so certain all the time?" he asked. "I don't," she said. "I choose to. It's the one thing I can control." By early afternoon, the house felt like a stage set for two different plays, the soft domestic one and the corporate knife fight. Isabella changed into a blazer that made Daniel's chest go oddly tight and tied her hair into a neat line. She stood in the doorway before she left for the board meeting, eyes on him. "If I come back with bruises, they'll be invisible," she said. "I don't want you to worry." "I will anyway," he said. "Take Nate, always." He watched her car pull away, a long thread unspooling from his rib cage. Lucas, sensing the shift, sat close on the couch and opened a book but didn't read. "Want to practice throwing a baseball?" Daniel asked impulsively. "Slow, easy." "I'll sit." Lucas's head snapped up. Now, Daniel said. They took 2 mitts to the backyard. Daniel sat on the patio chair, left leg extended, right foot anchored, and lobbed the ball underhand. Lucas caught it, the smack and leather clean as a bell, and threw it back with care. 10 throws. 20. The world telescoped into the geometry between their gloves, the bright circle of shared attention. On the 30th, Daniel reached too far, and pain flashed hot. He sucked in air, jaw tight. "You okay?" Lucas asked, ankle pivoting in panic. "I am," Daniel said, breathing through it. "Just a reminder that I'm not a machine." "Good," Lucas said, fierce. "Machines can't build families." Daniel blinked, then laughed, the sound easing the ache. "Fair point, Professor." Inside, the clock on the stove inched. Somewhere across town, a conference room filled with people who believed markets defined reality. Daniel washed the dust from his hands and tried not to count seconds. When Isabella finally walked back through the front door in the late afternoon, she carried 2 things: exhaustion like a shadow and a defiant glint in her eyes. "How bad?" Daniel asked. "Not fatal," she said, kicking off her heels with relief. "The chair tried to corner me on misuse of assets." I countered with a line item on corporate decency. A few faces looked like I'd spoken a dead language. Then I told them if anyone wanted my resignation for taking care of a man who saved my child, I would deliver it handwritten on company stationery, and I would take half the talent with me. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. "You threatened a walkout." "I promised a migration," she said, unrepentant. "And I meant it." Then I proposed something else, a family resilience fund. Quiet internal. No press, no optics. Emergency housing paid, leave flexibility therapy stipends for employees in crisis. It passed by 1 vote. He let out a low whistle. "You built a parachute and then jumped first." She smiled without sweetness. Sometimes they need a demonstration. Lucas, who had been pretending not to listen from the hallway, blurted, "Did you win?" Isabella looked at him and softened. "We didn't lose." He accepted that like a victory. "Can we have tacos to celebrate not losing tacos?" "We can do," Daniel said. "But you're seasoning the meat." While Lucas chopped tomatoes with extreme seriousness, Isabella checked her phone. A text from Armand Judge denied bail. Shooter remanded. Daniel watched her shoulders drop, the invisible brace uncoiling, and when she read the message aloud, Lucas actually whooped. Relief felt like a door unlocking. Even relief has shadows. After dinner, plates stacked, lime wedges sucked dry, a small mountain of shredded cheese confettied across the table, Isabella found the courage to ask the question she'd been carrying. "Would you move back if I asked?" she said. "To your apartment." Daniel looked up sharply. "If you asked me to, I would. But I'd hate it." She exhaled. "Then I won't. I wanted to see if I was being selfish." "You are," he said, and when her eyes widened, he added, "Me too." They stood in the kitchen under yellow light, both suddenly shy, as if they were teenagers in borrowed shoes. Later, after Sophie's bath and Lucas's insistence on reading 2 chapters instead of 1 after toothbrushes and socks and lights, negotiated down to crackling nightlights, Daniel found Isabella on the back steps, blazer off, bare feet on the cool wood. The sky was a velvet navy. The swing creaked gently in the breeze. "Tell me something true," she said without looking at him. He took a breath. "Truth used to be simple, love." Elena raised Lucas' work until exhausted repeat. Now it had edges and light. "When I jumped in front of that gun, I wasn't brave," he said. "I was inevitable, like a reflex. The brave part is waking up every day and letting you and your daughter matter to me. That scares me more." She turned her head, eyes bright. "My turn. I thought bringing you here was repayment. It turns out it was an invitation. I didn't know how much I wanted you to say yes until you were sitting in my kitchen making fun of my pancakes." He laughed low. They were a fire hazard. They were a love letter no one asked for. Silence, but a different kind, filled, not empty. He reached for her hand. She didn't make him ask. From upstairs, a thump. Then Lucas's voice, stage whisper, urgent. "Dad, I dropped my book. It fell under the bed." "It's dark down there." Daniel squeezed Isabella's fingers once and stood the ache in his ribs, hardly worth mentioning. "On my way, champ." He found the book, brushed dust bunnies from the cover, and tucked the blanket under his boy's chin with that particular precision he'd perfected over 8 years. Lucas blinked up at him. "We're staying?" Lucas asked. "We're staying." Daniel said the words, choosing themselves. "Okay," Lucas murmured. "Good." When Daniel came back downstairs, Isabella was still on the step, knees drawn up, looking not like a CEO or a headline, but like a woman who had built a fortress out of work and was pleasantly surprised to find she could lower the drawbridge and not be conquered. He lowered himself beside her. Their shoulders leaned until the space between was gone. A car rolled slowly past on the street, ordinary, neighborly. Crickets stitched the dark together. Somewhere in the distance, a train muttered to itself, as if it had opinions on their choices. "What if this breaks?" Daniel asked, voice barely over a breath. "What if I can't be what you need, or you can't be what I need?" "Then we fix it," she said. "Or we let it be imperfect and love it anyway." He stared at his hands a long moment, then turned his palm up. She laid hers in it like a vow. In the window glass behind them, their reflection looked like a simple thing, 2 people at the edge of a house holding hands. He knew better. Simplicity is something you fight for. Before bed, he cleaned the kitchen slow, the kind of careful closing rituals Elena had once called putting the day to sleep. He shut off the last light and stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening Sophie's soft sleep sounds, the steady hush of Lucas's breathing, the quiet throb of a dishwasher working its small, important job. He looked back at Isabella. She was waiting on the landing, book in hand, the offer of an ordinary evening in her eyes. He climbed, 1 step, 2. His ribs protested in their familiar language. His heart answered in a new one. At the top, she reached out and touched the scar through his shirt with 2 fingers, reverent, not pitying. "A map," she said quietly. "Of where you've been." And maybe he said of where we're going. In the dark, the house held them sturdy, imperfect, alive. Outside, the swing creaked once in a small breeze, going nowhere in particular. Inside, they crossed a line neither of them planned to redraw. The next morning began with rain. Not the soft drizzle that whispers on windows, but a steady downpour that turned the driveway into a mirror and blurred the line between sky and ground. Daniel woke to the sound of it and to the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. The storm outside seemed like a metaphor for what stirred inside change possibility and the danger of believing in both too much. He moved slowly, ribs stiff, but not screaming, and found Isabella already awake. She sat by the kitchen island in her robe laptop, open coffee steaming beside her. But her gaze wasn't on the screen, it was out the rain-smeared window, distant. "You're supposed to rest," he said gently, rubbing a hand over his hair. "And you're supposed to stop playing nurse," she replied, smiling faintly. "I was just thinking." He slid into the chair opposite her. "About last night." She closed the laptop almost guiltily. "About all of it. About what it means if you and Lucas stay here permanently. How I balance this house, the company, my daughter with you." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the counter. "Balance isn't your favorite word, is it?" "No," she admitted, "but it's yours. I watch you juggle pain, fatherhood, and humility as if it's second nature. Humility comes cheap when your son reminds you daily you're not as funny as you think." Her laugh was soft, genuine. "He adores you. Don't you dare forget it." Before the conversation could deepen, Lucas barreled into the kitchen, hair-messy socks sliding on tile. "Dad, Ms. Isabella Sophie says we can build a fort today since it's raining." Sophie followed, dragging a blanket nearly twice her size. "And we need cereal boxes for the walls." "Strong walls," she added seriously. Isabella glanced at Daniel with a raised brow. "Your call, Commander." "Fort duty accepted," Daniel said, ruffling Lucas's hair. "But every good fortress needs supplies, snacks, pillows, flashlights. Move out." The kids scrambled, and soon the living room transformed into a labyrinth of sheets and chairs, books propping up corners, and the faint glow of battery lanterns. Isabella crawled halfway inside her designer robe, brushing against couch cushions, and Daniel thought it might be the most disarming sight he'd ever witnessed. Inside the fort, Sophie whispered, "This is the safest place in the world." "Right, Daddy." Daniel's throat tightened, but Lucas answered first. "Yeah. As long as he's here, it is." Daniel ducked his head, hiding the sting in his eyes. He met Isabella's gaze across the dim space, and in her expression, he saw the same truth: they were building something bigger than blankets. By noon, the storm eased, but the day had already settled into a cocoon. Daniel helped with lunch, grilled cheese, cut diagonally, tomato soup steaming in bowls. The kids dipped and slurped, giggling at stringy cheese strands. Isabella moved among them with a softness Daniel hadn't seen before, as if she'd traded her armor for something lighter. When Sophie and Lucas settled down with a board game, Isabella pulled Daniel aside. "I have to tell you something. The board chair called me this morning." Daniel's stomach sank. "And they're uneasy. They think your presence here complicates things. The optics, the liability. He asked me," she hesitated, biting her lip. "He asked me to distance myself until the trial concludes." Daniel stiffened. "So it's official. I'm bad for your brand. Don't say it like that. How else should I say it?" His voice was calm, but it carried a steel edge. "I got shot because someone pointed a gun at your daughter, and now I'm a liability." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "They don't see what I see. They don't sit in this house and hear Sophie laugh again. They don't watch Lucas blossom because he feels safe. They only see numbers and headlines." Daniel exhaled, leaning against the counter. "So what's your answer?" I told them no. Her voice was sharp, almost defiant. "I said if they wanted to replace me, they'd have to put it in writing. I'm done living in fear of optics." His chest loosened at her words, though the ache of being unwanted still gnawed. "You didn't have to fight for me. I wasn't fighting for you, Daniel. I was fighting for us." The words lingered like a bell. He wanted to hold on to them, but before he could reply, Lucas shouted from the living room. "Dad, your turn." Daniel went, because some calls can't wait. The afternoon blurred with small joys. Sophie painted with watercolors Lucas constructed. Lego skyscrapers. Isabella actually took a nap on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin. Daniel sat nearby, sketching in the notebook he hadn't touched since Elena's death. His hand moved awkwardly at first, but soon, lines took shape. Sophie's braids, Lucas's grin, Isabella's profile softened by sleep. He closed the notebook quickly when Lucas leaned over, but the boy caught a glimpse. "That's us?" he asked, eyes wide. Daniel nodded. Practice sketches. Lucas grinned proud. You should show Miss Isabella. She'll love it. But Daniel wasn't ready. Some things were too raw, too vulnerable. Evening fell with the scent of rain still clinging to the world. They made pasta together, Lucas stirring sauce, Sophie sneaking parmesan, Isabella chopping basil with unexpected skill. They ate at the long table, candles flickering as if it were a celebration. After dinner, as the children climbed upstairs for bedtime stories, Isabella lingered at the sink beside Daniel, their hands brushed while rinsing plates, small but electric. You know what scares me? She asked softly. Plenty of things, he said. But tell me your top one. That I've built an empire and might lose it because I chose this. She gestured vaguely, him, the children, the home they were making. Daniel dried his hands, looking at her with steady eyes. Empires crumble, Isabella, but if you've got people to stand with you when the dust clears, that's not a loss. She swallowed, lips parting, like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Later in the quiet of night, Daniel tucked Lucas in. Dad, the boy whispered, if they make us leave, can we come back someday? Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the blanket. We're not leaving yet. And if we do, I'll find a way back. Lucas nodded, eyes heavy with trust. Downstairs, Isabella stood by the window watching the storm clouds break to reveal a sliver of moon. Daniel joined her, and for a moment neither spoke. They didn't need to. The rain had stopped, but something new had started, fragile and fierce at once. The following week began with tension no one could quite name, like the air before lightning strikes. The house was full of laughter one moment, and the next it was heavy with unspoken worries. Daniel could feel it pressing against him each time the phone rang for Isabella, each time she stepped onto the porch to take a call with her board. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and Lucas was brushing his teeth upstairs, Isabella sat at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine. Her face was pale under the soft light, her hair loose around her shoulders. She motioned for Daniel to sit, and he did, though he could already tell the conversation would not be easy. They're escalating, she said quietly. The board has called an emergency meeting. They're questioning my leadership. Daniel leaned back slowly. Because of me. Because of everything. Because I've made decisions they don't understand. Because I've let the company run itself these last weeks while I focused here. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the glass down. They want reassurance that my priorities are still aligned with theirs. Daniel's jaw tightened. So they want you to prove you can choose the company over your daughter. Over us. Isabella met his eyes. That's exactly what they want. The silence between them stretched until Lucas thundered downstairs, pajamas wrinkled toothbrush in hand. Dad, I lost another tooth. He grinned, holding it up like a trophy. Daniel forced a smile. That makes what, 7? Lucas nodded proudly, then rushed to show Isabella. She laughed and kissed the top of his head. Put it under your pillow, and the tooth fairy will come. As Lucas darted upstairs again, Isabella's laughter faded. How do I explain to them that this boy, my daughter, even you matter more than stock prices? You don't, Daniel said firmly. You live it. You don't need their permission to be a mother, or to be human. Her eyes searched his. And what if they fire me? Then you find out who you are without a boardroom telling you. The words landed heavier than he intended, and she looked away, blinking. It sounds so simple when you say it. It isn't, but simple doesn't mean easy. The next day, Isabella asked him to come with her to the city for the meeting. Daniel resisted at first. He didn't want to be paraded as her excuse, but she insisted. I need you there, not as a shield, not as proof, just as you. So they went. The children stayed with her sister, and Daniel found himself in a sleek tower of glass and steel, limping slightly as he followed Isabella into a boardroom lined with dark suits and colder eyes. The chairman, a man named Harrington with silver hair and a voice sharp as a blade, wasted no time. Ms. Calloway, your performance has been erratic. The media coverage of your personal life, this situation, compromises us. You've blurred the line between family and leadership. Isabella's chin lifted. What you call blurring, I call balance. For too long, I gave this company every ounce of myself. And what did it give me back? Sleepless nights. A daughter who barely knew me. A hollow victory. Harrington sneered. And this man, his finger jabbed toward Daniel, is the reason you've abandoned your duties. Daniel started to speak, but Isabella raised a hand to silence him. Her voice cut through the room. This man saved my daughter's life. He reminded me what leadership actually means, protecting what matters. If you can't see that, then perhaps it's not me who doesn't belong here. It's all of you. The room buzzed with whispers. Harrington's face darkened. Be careful, Ms. Calloway. The board can and will replace you. Then do it, Isabella said calmly, though her hand trembled where Daniel could see. But you'll have to explain to our investors why the company ousted a CEO for choosing integrity over optics. There was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then one of the younger board members, a woman with sharp glasses, cleared her throat. She has a point. Our public image is already strained. Removing her now could backfire. The tension shifted the tide, turning ever so slightly. Harrington sat back seething but silent. Isabella seized the moment. I am not walking away. Not from this company, not from my family. If you want me gone, take a vote. Otherwise, let me lead. No vote was taken that day. The meeting adjourned in uneasy quiet. In the car afterward, Isabella finally exhaled. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. Daniel reached over, steadying one with his own. You were brilliant in there. I was terrified. She laughed shakily. But for once, I didn't care what they thought. I only cared what Sophie would think if she saw me bend. Daniel studied her profile lit by the city's neon glow. She'd be proud. I know I am. Back at the house, Sophie ran into her arms, Lucas trailing behind both children, bubbling with stories from their day. The tension of the boardroom dissolved into the warmth of family. Chaos. Sticky fingers, mismatched pajamas, bedtime giggles. Later that night, when the children finally slept, Isabella stood at the doorway of the guest house. Daniel, I'm not sure where this goes, but I want you to know I'm not afraid of the cost anymore. If it comes down to the company or this, she gestured between them, I choose this. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to believe. It wanted to let the words root inside him, but part of him still feared the storm yet to come. Still, when he kissed her hand gently, neither of them pulled away. The next few days carried an odd peace, the kind that feels almost fragile, as though the world was holding its breath. Daniel tried to settle into it, to accept the quiet joys of mornings with Sophie, and Lucas building pancake towers of afternoons when Isabella took calls on the patio, but returned with a smile instead of tension in her shoulders. But peace rarely lasts long, and the storm they had been dreading arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It began with a phone call. Isabella's assistant, her voice tight, said, "There's been a leak. A reporter has the story of Daniel shooting the hospital bills. They're framing it as reckless, asking why the CEO of Calloway Industries is sheltering a stranger under her roof." Daniel was in the kitchen drying dishes when Isabella hung up. Her face had drained of color. "They're coming after us." His gut tightened. "You mean after you?" "No. After us." She took his hand, gripping it hard. "But we face it together." By evening, the house was swarmed. News vans lined the street, their headlights flashing against the gates. Cameras waited like vultures. Reporters shouted questions at the guards. Is she compromising the company? Who is the mysterious man? What's his past? Lucas peeked out the window, eyes wide. Dad, why are there so many people? Daniel crouched beside him. Because adults like to talk about things they don't understand. Sophie clung to Isabella's side. Are they mad at you, Mommy? Isabella stroked her daughter's hair. They can be mad at me all they want, sweetheart, but they don't get to touch what matters here. That night, with the children asleep upstairs, Daniel and Isabella sat in the dimly lit living room watching the press lights flicker against the walls. I knew this would happen, he muttered. I did too. She lifted her glass of water, staring at it as though the swirl inside might answer questions. The thing is, I don't care. Not anymore. I've spent my entire career running from scandal chasing perfection. But after that night after you, how can I let fear dictate my life again? Daniel leaned forward, voice low. If staying with me ruins your company, ruins everything you've built. She cut him off. Then I'll build again. But I won't rebuild without you in it. The word silenced him, and for once he didn't argue. He only reached across and took her hand. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. Callaway CEO hides hero in mansion. Stock prices waver. Amid controversy. Who is Daniel Brooks? Daniel walked into the kitchen to find Isabella scrolling through article after article. She looked up, her eyes clear. We need to own this story before they twist it beyond recognition. What do you mean, I mean a press conference? I tell the truth. I tell them about the shooting, about you saving Sophie, about why you're here. No hiding. Daniel shook his head. That paints a target on my back. You already have one, she said softly. But at least this way the world hears it from us, not from vultures. They held the conference the following afternoon on the steps of the mansion. The sky was a hard, cloudless blue, the air charged with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing. Isabella stepped forward first, her voice steady. My name is Isabella Callaway. Yes, a man named Daniel Brooks is staying in my home. He is not a liability. He is the reason my daughter is alive today. She paused, scanning the crowd. On the night of the attack, when others froze, Daniel stepped in front of the gun. He took the bullet that was meant for Sophie, and for that I owe him more than words can repay. The crowd erupted with questions, but Isabella raised her hand for silence. If you ask why I would open my home to him, the answer is simple gratitude, respect, humanity. If that costs me my position, so be it. But I refuse to live in fear of optics while ignoring the man who saved my child's life. Then, to Daniel's shock, she turned to him. Daniel, will you say something? He hadn't planned to. His chest tightened as microphones leaned closer, but Sophie's face flashed in his mind, her hand clutching his that night, and he found his voice. I didn't jump in front of that gun because I wanted recognition, he said quietly. I did it because no child should face that terror, and because my own son was watching me, learning what it means to stand up when it counts. His voice wavered, but he steadied it. If you think that makes me reckless, so be it, but I'll never regret it. The silence that followed was broken by the rapid click of cameras. That evening, the footage flooded every network, and to everyone's surprise, the tide began to turn. Social media lit up with support. Hero Dad saves CEO's daughter. Callaway's stand for family. Investors wavered at first, but then slowly confidence began to rebound. Inside the house, the children celebrated with popcorn and blankets, as if the press conference had been some kind of sports game. You were awesome, Daddy Lucas declared, nearly spilling his bowl. Sophie chimed in, and Mommy looked like a queen. Isabella laughed, hugging them both. But when her eyes met Daniel's across the couch, there was something unspoken there, something more than victory. Later, when the house grew quiet and the lights dimmed, Daniel found her on the balcony, the night breeze tugging at her hair. She turned as he approached, and her voice was barely a whisper. I'm not sure where this road ends. But I know one thing, Daniel. I want you on it with me. For the first time since the shooting, Daniel allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a future not defined by scars, but by choices. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to choose too. 1 year after the gunshot cracked through Miller's Market, the scar on Daniel Rivera's chest had faded to a pale crescent, a quiet map line. He touched sometimes in the shower, a reminder that a single brave second can redraw a life. By then, the guest house wasn't a guest anything. It was home, a refrigerator crowded with school art and crooked magnets, a backyard with a tire swing that creaked like an old song, a front hall forever dusted with grass clippings and sneaker scuffs. Mornings ran on the same simple magic coffee rising in the pot bacon popping like rain on a tin roof. 2 kids thundering downstairs to negotiate the pecking order of pancakes. And most days, Isabella actually beat everyone to the kitchen, hair in a clip, bare feet, on cool tiles stirring batter with a focus she used to save for earnings calls. Don't burn the love letter, Daniel would say, grinning, as she poured the first circle into the pan. Ruthless. She'd reply, rolling her eyes, but there was a lightness behind the routine, a private language built on survival and second chances. A year altered other truths, too. The shooter ended up remanded without bail, and later convicted, his smirk finally shut off by a judge's gavel. The shorter accomplice took a plea and disappeared into a facility 3 counties over. Detective Armand sent a note on plain stationery the day sentencing came through, 3 sentences tidy, like a man who kept his promises. Press interest evaporated.